Welcome to part 3 of our 4-part series about restitution. In this series, we've already talked about the difference between restitution and victim compensation and what things restitution can and can't pay for. Next, we're going to talk about what documentation is needed for a restitution request. As we talked about in our last video, restitution can only be for pecuniary losses or things a dollar amount can be attached to. This means documentation has to show what something costs to be considered. Things that work for documentation might include receipts or invoices for things that show payments made, insurance statements that show co-payment amounts, a detailed letter about future costs from someone like a doctor or therapist that explains what's needed for how long and the cost of future treatment. Things that don't work for documentation include a letter you write yourself about costs that you've incurred, bills or invoices that show what was charged but don't show if any payment was actually made, pictures of things that were damaged isn't enough documentation because it doesn't show the actual amount of the lost and the replaced item, or a general letter about needing future things that's not from a person that would be paid, like a doctor or therapist, or doesn't have details about exactly what's needed, why, the timeline, and the estimated cost. A lot of people ask about when to provide documentation to the district attorney or prosecutor around restitution. Often restitution information is requested at the beginning of a case, sometimes on a form that's mailed out very early in a case. But there can be very important reasons to wait to submit things for restitution requests. One of the reasons is that cases take a really long time, and you may have many more costs by the end of a case than you would list on a form at the beginning. It could be 2 years later, and you could have incurred a lot of other costs that you wouldn't have noted or even known about 2 years before if you filled out the form. The other reason to wait is to protect your private information and safety. If you remember back to the first video, restitution only applies in criminal cases after a defendant is convicted, which means there's no need to submit anything if there is no conviction. Anything submitted to the district attorney or a victim advocate becomes part of the case, and it becomes discoverable and means it can be given to the defendant. This is especially important if you have documentation with private medical or mental health information, or anything that gives safety related information that shows where you have appointments, where you live, what kind of places you travel to for medical treatment, mental health treatment, or where you incur other costs in your area. If you submit any of these during the case, they could be shared with the defendant, and if there's not a conviction, it wouldn't be necessary for any of that to have been shared anyway. At the end of a case, do make sure that you share everything that you have and all the documentation you have with the district attorney or advocate right away, and ask them what you need to do to protect any private information. So if you could black out any addresses or information before you give it to them. In our next video, we will talk about how to collect restitution.